Hey, everybody. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our free estate planning webinar. My name is Sarah Eifert. I'm the Vice President of Marketing with Dogs for Better Lives, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I am based in surprisingly springy Wisconsin. I'd love to hear where folks are attending from. If you want to share, you can include your location in the chat. A couple of housekeeping notes. So we are recording today's presentation for future viewing. Everybody who RSVP'd for this webinar today will receive the link in the recording tomorrow in their inbox. We do have closed captions available, so you can click the little CC box at the bottom right of this video to activate those. And we will have time today for a brief Q&A. So to ask your questions, you'll use that YouTube chat box. You can go ahead and put those questions in at any time during the presentation, and we will get to those towards the end. So you can use that chat box, or you can send me an email. My email is Sarah, S-A-R-A, @dogsforbetterlives.org. We will try to get to as many questions as we can today. For those of you who are new to us, Dogs for Better Lives trains and places assistance dogs free of charge with deaf or hard of hearing adults, children diagnosed with autism, and licensed professionals working with vulnerable communities so people with disabilities can lead safer and more independent lives. All of our dogs are placed with clients at zero cost to them. You can learn more about us at dogsforbetterlives.org. So one of the things that we're really proud to offer is legacy and estate planning resources for our community. And today's webinar is part of those great resources. And so with that, I would love to introduce today's presenter. It's Adrian Snyder. Adrian's an attorney who serves as the Oregon Trust Manager for D.A. Davidson Trust Company. He has over 23 years of experience in estate planning, trust administration, and guiding clients in completing their will or trust. His office is based in Medford, Oregon, and he enjoys all that Southern Oregon has to offer with his wife, 4 kids, and loyal dog, Berkeley. Sorry about that. Adrian, I'm going to turn it over to you to get started on this presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah, and good to be here with you all today. Thanks for joining us. And, as Sarah mentioned, I've got about 23 years of experience in working with families and navigating estate planning questions and trying to put together a plan that will work for them. And today we're going to talk about one specific part about creating your estate plan. And I think it's one of the most important parts, which is naming an executor. So I want to start by talking about, what is an executor, or what are we talking about when we say executor? That may be something that's obvious to you, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about today. And kind of most importantly, executor is kind of a very general catch-all phrase for a person or entity that you're naming to handle your financial and legal affairs if you're ever disabled or at your death. So executor is kind of an umbrella term, and there are specific terms for an executor based on the document you're discussing. So as you can see there, under a will, it's usually called a personal representative. And under a trust, it's usually called a trustee. But we're going to use the term executor as kind of that catch-all phrase for the person you're appointing to handle legal and financial matters if you're disabled or at your death. And I think another important distinction here today is that, an executor generally handles financial and legal matters. They don't handle medical issues. So you may have an executor that's also your medical power of attorney or your healthcare representative. But today we're just kind of focused on the kind of trust and will person that you're appointing and not around the healthcare. Healthcare is probably a topic that we don't have time to cover today, and maybe that'll be a topic for a future webinar that we have. So kind of moving on and looking at what the basic options are for an executor. And there are 3 basic options, family and friends, which is probably the most common, professionals, and then corporate trustees or corporate trust companies. So we're going to kind of touch on all 3 of those and talk about some of the benefits and considerations. So as we're going through this, you can kind of think about your own situation and what might be important to you or what might be the right fit for you when you think about the right person to name as your executor. So first, starting with family and friends, and I think that's where most people start, is looking at the people around me and who do I know or who do I feel comfortable with to handle my financial affairs. And this really could be, when you think about it, if you're disabled, we're talking about probably being disabled to the point that you could not handle any financial matters. So paying your utility bills for your home, taking care of your home, managing your investment portfolio, withdrawing funds from retirement funds if you have a retirement account, as well as filing taxes and also handling any property issues you might have. If you have a home, a rental property, they would be the person that would be taking care of that during your lifetime if you needed, as well as things like if you're disabled and need some caregivers coming into the home, they would be arranging for that and making sure they're properly paid and you don't have any issues around caregivers. And then generally the same person continues on, that if they serve during a period of your disability, they're going to continue after your death to manage your estate after you're gone, to distribute it to wherever you've designated to go, whether that's family, friends, relatives, charities, or a combination of those. So looking first at family and friends, some of the benefits I think are obvious. A lot of times you're choosing a person that's known you either a long time or your whole life. And so they're really going to be very familiar with you, how you live your life, what your preferences are, what your current situation is, and what you would probably want in different situations during life, and then also for your estate after you pass away. So some considerations around family members. First of all is around relationships. A lot of what that person is going to be doing is the financial and legal matters we just talked about, but also they're going to be working with people. They're going to be working with your family or the people you've designated as part of your estate plan. So you really need someone who can be collaborative and communicate to those people, because a lot of problems arise when people don't communicate what's going on and beneficiaries or family members are left guessing, what's going on, how are mom and dad being cared for, how are these decisions being made. So having some accountability and transparency is important for communication. So I think you want to choose someone that you feel like generally works well with the people that are in your circle of family and friends that are going to be involved or a part of your estate. So you definitely want someone who can work with people as well. So second thing, when you're appointing a person, we're all faced with the reality of our humanity. So we're all going to get older. We may retire. We may have our own health issues. So if you're appointing someone that is, in a later stage of life than you, I think you've got to consider, their health and age, and are they going to be there when I possibly could need them in the future. You can certainly have backups, and that's a good idea if you are appointing someone who is older or a much later generation than you are. But it's something to consider, because you don't want to be in the position where you're suddenly needing help and the person that you want to help is unable to do that. So a good thing to consider, and have some backups for a person that you're naming in case that ever comes up. So we'll turn next to professionals as kind of the second primary option. And when I say professionals, I'm primarily talking about professionals that will hold themselves out to administer estates or handle estates for people. And, some estate planning attorneys, not all, but, there definitely are some attorneys that will do that type of work, that will stand in for you to be your decision maker. Also, a lot of tax preparers or CPAs and bookkeepers, a lot of times will also do estate work. And then there are individuals that just set themselves out there as what we call a fiduciary. So they have their own business and profession as serving as executor, trustee, personal representative for people. So, that's a general term of fiduciary, but anyone who's kind of saying my business is to handle estates for people. So what are some of the benefits and considerations around this option? So first, around the benefits, usually if you're hiring a professional and they've got a business reputation to protect, they should be operating at a pretty high level of integrity. And I think ideally, if you're choosing a professional, if it's a professional that you're already working with, so it's your attorney or your tax preparer that you're very familiar with, or maybe it's been working with you for years, you feel very comfortable about their professionalism and their accountability, that can be a very comfortable fit. If it's someone that you are just getting introduced to, you may want to gather more information about them. And second of all, in addition to their professional integrity, would be their area of expertise. So if you're paying someone to do this, they should have an area of expertise that they're going to bring to the table for your estate. And that may be extra knowledge in legal matters, it may be bookkeeping skills, it may be tax filing and tax understanding of taxes. But you definitely want to have somebody that has some experience with either estate plan issues or legal and financial issues, because really that's what you're paying for when you get a professional. So considerations for professionals. First is the cost. The cost for professionals can vary widely. I mean, they generally have, two ways that they charge. Either they charge an hourly rate, so whatever time they put in is what they're going to charge, or they charge a percentage of your assets. So they would say, our percentage is 1.5% or whatever it might be for that professional. But it's important for you to know and to understand how they charge, because like a lot of things, the devil's in the details. You've got to understand how they're going to be charging. And, to use attorneys as an example, some attorneys will charge their full attorney rate, for this type of executor work. So if the attorney is between $300 and $500 an hour, that can add up pretty quickly. So that's just a consideration. Doesn't mean they should be ruled out, but I think understanding what the cost may be is an important consideration. Other attorneys may charge a reduced rate for executor work, or they may say, well, most of the work is done by my legal assistant, and this is what her hourly or his hourly rate is. And that's how we charge, which makes it a little bit more economical for the client. So same thing with CPAs, got to understand how they're going to charge, and as well as for other professionals that are putting themselves out there as fiduciaries, to understand how they're going to charge. And usually once they talk to you and kind of understand, what your estate encompasses, what are the assets and what needs to be done, they probably can give you a pretty good estimate of what the cost would be. And I think that's a good thing to get as well, as just an estimate of what they think it'll cost to administer your estate or take care of your estate. So second consideration for professionals is similar to the family and friends. You're appointing a person in most cases, so you've got to understand, how likely are they to retire before I would need them. They also may have their own health issues. So you've got to understand what their succession plan is. So if anything happens to them and they're not available to do it for you, is there another person in the firm that'll step in and take care of that for you? Or do you need to make sure you have sufficient backups to that person, that if they do leave the business or retire, that you have a backup person to administer your estate? So good to know kind of some of the what ifs that may come up for a professional. So moving on to the last option that we're going to discuss today, around corporate trustees and corporate executors. And when I say corporate, generally I'm talking about banks. So a lot of the major banks have executor services that they would offer, and those services are generally offered to clients of the bank and also to anybody else. So generally it's open to anyone that is interested or needs the service. And then also trust companies, which trust companies are generally under the banking laws, but they don't have any banking ability. They don't have bank accounts and lending. They just do trust administration or estate or executor type of work as a trust company. But again, both banks and trust companies are generally going to be regulated either by the state or by the OCC, which is what monitors and audits banks. So what are some of the benefits and kind of full disclosure? So I work for Davidson Trust Company, so we are a trust company. So that's kind of where most of my experience comes from. But kind of the benefits around banks and trust companies. First, again, professional integrity. Generally banks and trust companies are hiring people that are highly skilled, that either have a background in tax or financial planning and investment, or in law. So they generally are wanting very highly skilled people in place to handle estates for their clients. And they also have that added layer of a auditor. So every bank and trust company has an outside auditor as well as internal auditors that are kind of looking over their shoulder and making sure they're always doing the right thing for the client. So you get a very high degree of kind of professional integrity and accountability when you have a bank or a trust company. So expertise, again, you'll be hiring this person, so you want to make sure they have expertise. And in a bank and trust company, that pretty much is all they do is handle estates and manage trusts and do executor work. So generally the level of expertise is pretty high. And thirdly, trust company is a company, so it's never going to die. It's never going to get old. It's never going to go away. So if you appoint a trust company, generally you may not have as much need to name someone after the trust company. You still could if you wanted to, but generally it's not as much of a need for a trust company. So considerations around trust companies and banks. First is, again, cost. I think understanding how much a corporate executor is going to charge. And generally, almost all corporate and bank trust companies are going to charge a percentage of your assets. So whatever assets you have in your estate, they'll charge a percentage. That percentage can range. It can be anywhere from around 1.5% to 2.5%, so somewhere in that range. So you want to have a good idea of what that percentage is and kind of how they charge for any additional services in addition to that percentage. Second of all is local options. There certainly are some national banks and trust companies that'll do work, nationwide, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have someone nearby to you. And at least in my opinion, I think it's helpful to have someone close by, or that you feel comfortable that they're willing to be close by. And I think this makes the biggest difference when you're disabled. So if you were at a point in your life where you had to rely on someone else to handle your finances, maybe you're getting care in your home and having caregivers come in, you want to make sure there's somebody who is physically checking on you and making sure your quality of life is as good as possible. So understanding, are they local, or how local are they for me? And then also, if they're not very local, what's their commitment to being here in person? How often would they see me? How often would we be meeting is kind of a good thing to understand before you appoint them. So last thing I would say is to stay in touch. As I mentioned, trust companies don't die or get sick, but sometimes they do get purchased, or there are mergers, or the person that you met with that you loved and felt like you had a good connection with has left or retired. So it's a good thing, maybe every few years to be meeting with your trust company and just talking to them and making sure that you feel comfortable that the person you met with is still there and you feel good about that, and that the company is still stable and no changes have come up. Because, it is less of a likelihood, but there certainly is the possibility that something could change in the business that would make you make a different decision about who you want to be for your executor. So those are kind of the considerations and benefits for all three of those options. So now I'll give you kind of a little bit of advice on how do you decide, or how do you evaluate, potential executor. And I think the previous slides have kind of set out the considerations for banks, trust companies, and professionals. So this really focuses more on individuals. If I'm looking at different family members, or I've got a set of friends that I think could do it, but I'm trying to decide who that could be, these are some things that can help you decide. And I've kind of put it in the categories of time, talent, and treasure. So first of all, time. Some people are very capable, but they're just very busy. Maybe they're on the other side of the country or out of state, so it'd be very time consuming to come and be present for you and to handle your estate matters. Or they have a busy life. They're young, they have a family, or they have a career, and really doing estate work is like a part-time job. It can be very time consuming at times. So you want to make sure that person has the time to commit to do it, if you were ever in need. Second is talent. Ideally, you would like to have someone that you feel comfortable with their skill level, that they've got at least enough knowledge, or enough knowledge to get the right professionals in place for things like bill paying and retirement accounts and taxes, and administering the trust. And they can certainly have attorneys or CPAs advising them, but you want to make sure that they've got enough sophistication to be able to handle, not only their own financial matters, but also yours, and to do it well. So lastly, treasurer, you definitely want someone who's financially stable. You don't want someone who has their own financial issues now managing your finances, where there may be maybe conflicts of interest that come up about how they're treating different beneficiaries and who gets what and how much. So you don't want to have any conflicts that they have in their own personal life around their finances. So just some good things to consider, I think, in those three areas. So I think now we can kind of turn it over and see what kind of questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. This has been really helpful. I've already learned a bunch of things, so I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through those options. I did receive a couple of questions ahead of time. So the first one I have is from Mary, and Mary's asking, can an executor also be a beneficiary? And that kind of ties into what you were saying before about any conflicts of interest and things like that. How would you respond to Mary?
Yeah, there definitely is no kind of legal reason why a beneficiary can't be the executor. So they definitely can. And so then I think you look at the question of should they? And I think, Sarah, you kind of hit on it. Is this a person that is going to be fair or in a position of deciding on different matters and who gets what and how much? And will that cause any friction? Or do you feel completely comfortable? I mean, certainly there are times when the beneficiary is the only beneficiary, and then serving as the executor makes a lot of sense because they're kind of just managing their own assets. But if there's several siblings, just making sure that you're choosing the child or sibling that can get along with the others well, and people will kind of respect that person in their decision-making process. So. Okay,
great. Yeah, I guess another question just that popped into my head with regards to family. Do you only have the option to choose one family member, or can you choose two to work together? Or does that just make things too messy? Like, what do you suggest for that?
Yeah, well, you can name more than one. I mean, I don't recommend it because, there's a lot of practical issues that come up with naming more than one. So if you have two co-executors or even three sometimes, because a lot of times the problem with two can be, well, how do we have a tiebreaker for decisions? If we disagree, we got to come to agreement or everything just stops and gets stalled. And then if you add a third one as a tiebreaker, it kind of gets cumbersome. So I think choosing the person that you feel is best to do it is the best way to go. I mean, the other practical considerations are a lot of times banks or investment houses or anything really in the financial realm. A lot of times they have a hard time deciding if you have more than trustee. Can we feel comfortable that this one trustee can tell us what to do or to give us direction? So I've just seen it cause some issues around some practical things around giving banks direction or investment companies. So I would say if you can, appointing one is probably best.
That makes sense. I want to remind folks that are attending live that you are welcome to ask your questions. So please put those into the YouTube chat box. I recognize not everyone maybe wants to use the YouTube chat box for their questions to Adrian. So we also have Adrian's contact information up on screen. So you could reach out and I'm sure he'll be happy to respond directly to you afterwards as well. Another question, you brought up backups. And so how is that sort of designated when you have a backup? Can you have a backup? So if you choose a family member, for example, can you choose a backup trust company like D.A. Davidson as a backup? Or do you have to sort of go directly to that? Like, do backups have to be people? Can they be companies? How would that work?
Yeah, great question. Because you can, and a lot of times that is what people will do, is they may have, a friend or family member that is, of an older generation, and they're really the person they want to serve. But that's how you can address any concerns that if they have their own issues and wouldn't be able to serve, we have a backup. So you could name, an individual maybe in the first place or even the first and second place, and then a trust or bank, as in the third position or professional. So you have, you have something in place if anything unexpected happens. So that certainly is possible, and a lot of times that happens if a family has a child or just two children that may or may not want to serve or to handle it. They would always have the option to resign or to step down and say, we just prefer for the professional to handle it. So,
gotcha. That makes total sense. That ties really well into one of our other pre-submitted questions. So if I wanted to find a professional trustee, how would I go about finding one? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I mean, I think a great place to start is with the professionals in your life. So if you're working with an attorney to put together your estate plan, I'm guessing they will have suggestions on a professional. If your attorney does not, or you're not working with an attorney yet, your tax preparers.
Can you still hear us, Adrian? Seems like you're freezing.
You certainly can check and probably search something like trust companies or professional fiduciary or executors, and that should give you more referrals. There is no formal organization that will provide referrals, unfortunately, to professional executors. So I generally think the best place to start is with the professionals that are already in your life and see what recommendations they might have.
Great. Yep. That makes total sense. Wanda's asking, with a fee from a bank or corporate executor, is it only charged once the individual is deceased? Are there any upfront or annual fees while the individual is still living? Or I should say disabled, since that's part of this.
Good question. And in general, there are no fees for just signing up. So if you decide to name a corporate trustee in your trust or in your will, that trustee is going to want to have a copy of those. So if they ever need to serve, they're ready to go with a copy of your documents. But generally, there's no fee. You usually don't have to sign a separate contract. Your trust or will is your agreement that you're hiring this company to act as my executor. So there generally should be no cost to you just for naming them. And that's also something you can always change. Estate planning documents can be changed at any time. So if you change your mind, or sometimes we're in the position where families have young children, and so eventually they want those children to grow into the position, but right now they're just too young or too inexperienced, so they want a professional. But then maybe 5-10 years down the road, they may reevaluate that and put the children in place. So it is common to be named in documents, something you can always change, and there shouldn't be any cost until they actually have to do work on your behalf, until you're disabled or until after you died.
So to make changes, what is typically required of that? Because that's part of can you just kind of make note of that in your files? Do you have to go to an attorney? What's the process?
Yeah, so all estate planning documents are signed with kind of specific requirements or execution requirements. So if you do need a change, most likely in most cases, it's best to go back to the attorney and have them make the change. Some people do like to write on their documents, which isn't necessarily valid, because I think the important thing is if you do want to make changes, you want to make sure they're valid and effective, and the attorney is the best person to make sure that gets done correctly. So it's usually not the answer that people want, that you have to go back to the attorney, but it's generally the best option to make sure it gets done correctly.
Okay, great. So Janice is asking, is there flexibility on charges if the will is not complex?
Yeah, there is. And if you have a will and you don't have a trust, then your estate will go through the probate process, which generally probate has a set fee. So that is the fee no matter what the trust company's schedule is or what they say they're going to charge. They have to accept, what the law says that they would get. So your attorney would be able to answer that question of what it is. But for a simple estate, the fee is generally pretty reasonable that's provided by your state probate law.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions in the chat. And Janice literally just emailed me, so that was good timing. So at this point, I think is there anything else that you want to share? Anything that we've not covered today? I know your presentation was relatively thorough, but Are there other questions that typically come up when you talk to folks about this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is to definitely give it some thought. I mean, I think a lot of people, either because it can be a hard topic to think about it on your death and disability, or it just seems easier to default to a particular person, the oldest child, or whatever it might be. But I would definitely give some thought to making sure that the person that you're naming or the company that you're naming, you feel really comfortable with, and have a good, secure feeling that this is the right way to go. If you have some misgivings, probably not the right person. And then also to always review your plan. I mean, I think what we've learned from the pandemic is that a lot can change in just 3 years. So I think looking at your plan at least every 3 years, I mean, ideally maybe once a year, because really family events, can change your estate plan. People getting married, people getting divorced, people having children, friends getting older. So, as time goes on, you want to make sure you're reviewing your plan. And, I think a great time to do that is just part of your preparation for income taxes. Just pull out your estate plan too and read through it and make sure the people and decisions you made in that plan are still valid and you still feel good about them. And that's kind of the best way, I think, to make sure it stays up to date and to make sure you've got a solid plan if you ever need help.
That's a great tip. I didn't think about checking it annually and tying it in with taxes makes a whole lot of sense. So that's great, Adrian. Thank you. We did get another question in chat. So is there an appropriate fee to pay to the executor if they happen to be a family or personal friend?
Yeah, that's a good question because it comes up a lot, and it depends on how you feel about the discussion. Hopefully you're discussing this with the person you're looking at appointing as executor. So I would probably have a discussion with them about compensation. Some people would say, you're my friend or you're my family, I'm not going to charge anything and I don't need to be paid, which is certainly fine. But others would say, yes, I would like to be paid. And so you can either have a conversation and come to an agreement about what is appropriate, for your estate. Or, if you don't feel like you can have that conversation, and for some reason you can't, you can set out the fee. So you can either say the fee is this percentage of the assets, or you can say it's this dollar amount. So you are allowed to kind of set the fee in what you think is appropriate and reasonable for the estate and for that person. Any fees that an executor has is considered income, so it's taxed. So you also have some executors would say, I don't want to have more taxable income, so I'd rather just not take a fee. So great if you can have a conversation about that, but if you can't, you can either leave it unspoken to in your estate plan and it'll be whatever is reasonable, or you can set out a specific fee for that executor if that's what you prefer.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess with that, if anyone has any other questions, we can quick respond to those. We still have a little bit of time available if you do have questions. But otherwise, I want to thank you, Adrian, for your presentation today. It was very helpful. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with our DBL community today. And thank you for all the folks that have attended live and are watching on the replay later on. We do have a survey that we will pop into the chat. So we actually really use the survey responses to inform what kind of topics we want to present on in the future and share with you. So we will include that survey in the chat. You can see, you can tell us what you thought about today's presentation, and then also give us some suggestions for things you'd like to hear more about in the future. Let's see, we've got actually our next webinar on April 4th planned. We don't have the RSVP links ready for that yet, but we'll be releasing those in March. And that webinar will be all about our From Shelter to Service Dog program. So a great program. We're excited to share more with our community about that. And that actually did come from our survey results. We had people request a little bit more information about that program. So we'll be excited to share that in April. And then we also have an event coming up on May 18th. So we have our second annual signature event, Bon Appetit. And that is happening on May 18th. It's a Saturday, and it's a virtual event, so you can attend from wherever you are. You can RSVP at dogsforbetterlives.org/Bon Appetit, and that link is on screen right now. It's a recipe treat competition, and we have contestants from across the country who are going to be trying to win the prize of top dog, and all in support of service dogs. So it'll be a great event. Lots of great stories to share in that event. It'll be well worth attending. And I guess with that, thank you, Adrian. Thank you again. Thank you all for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you.